Alright, shalom YouTube. So in this video, what I want to do is I want to encompass what I'm currently going through when it comes to legal struggles. Because, again, you have to keep in mind that there's a hierarchy when it comes to biblical schemes of everything, right? So if you watched my first video and what have you, I debunked that modern Christians aren't Christians and Orthodox Jews aren't Jews. And now a lot of people, if you look at America and what have you, the founding fathers like George Washington and what have you, which were Freemasons, a lot of them believe that they're the chosen people and what have you, right? Because, look at what they did for the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths self-evident that all men are created equal, and men would be inclusive of women, because men is part of that, right? So that said, granted, they may not have been perfect in a lot of ways and what have you, and there's a lot of oppression historically and what have you, but keep in mind that's the true principle of true Christianity is equality, right? There is no male, there is no female, there is no Jew, there is no Gentile. It's a matter of being obedient to Yahweh and His commandments, right? So that said, when it comes to historical church and what have you, as I indicated in my first video possibly, the medieval church, they kept everybody in the dark, right? So Emperor Constantine changed Sabbath to Sunday, which is a literal day to worship the sun, which he took from the Egyptians and took it from the Babylonians, right? Where Nimrod was worshipped as the sun god Baal, his wife Semiramis was worshipped as Ishtar, the queen of heaven, their son Tammuz was worshipped as the reincarnation of Nimrod. Given Nimrod died prior to his birth, he became the new sun god Baal, right? And then you have December 25th that celebrates the birth of Tammuz, has nothing to do with Yeshua. And likewise, Easter celebrates Ishtar, or aka Semiramis, the queen of heaven, so to speak, and it again has nothing to do with Yeshua, right? And Easter occurs around Passover and what have you. So that's had a lot of people, there's a lot of misconceptions, and religion, it's been utilized to control the crowd, the population, right, in general. Historically, throughout all these different nations, you had all these different emperors and what have you, all these different dynasties and what have you. It's basically people wanting to be sovereign over the people, right? That's what the reality is, rather than being equal, right? So then you have all these wealth and what have you. So look at what's going on in America. It's something that's been going on for many thousands of years, right? It's not anything new. It's, well, I've got all the money, I got all this knowledge, I got all this power, therefore you will worship me as a deity because I own everything, right? So again, when it comes to true Christianity, blessed are the poor, right? For they shall inherit the earth, and so on and so forth. And that if somebody that's rich, it's easier for a rich man to go through an eye of a needle than it is to make it into the kingdom of Elohim, right? Because they're putting more merit in the money and those aspirations of wealth. But when push comes to shove, when it comes to their death, they're going to probably be part of that second death because they put too much merit on the money rather than helping everybody out, right? So that's the true principle of true Christianity. It doesn't matter how much you know, what your business acumen is or anything like that, to acquire all this wealth and what have you, because you're basically oppressing everybody else, right? That's the essence of true Christianity. Again, it's a matter of equality. There's not any single one person any better than anybody else, right? So those fundamental principles have never been in full effect, because again, if you look at historically what Yeshua was doing, he was going up against the hypocritical Jews of the time, right? Because they were being disobedient to Yahweh and His commandments. They were doing the exact same thing that all these other different cultures and societies did. They wanted to believe themselves to be deities, and so to speak. So they were nipping away at everything and looking for money. And I have been agree. I watched another video on TikTok and what have you, but it's something that's been my mentality for the last 8 years or so. Tithing, right? What is tithes? Tithes is 10% of your increase. Now, if you go to a modern church or what have you, modern Christianity, what have you, what do they want you to tithe with? Money, right? It's not a matter of your increase. And then you have all these different complications within society and what have you that cause these different issues. but it's not a matter of money. Now, the reason why it's money in modern society is because you're not really supporting the government being the people. You're supporting the false doctrines of men, where they're just going to, they're using psychology and what have you on you. They're just trying to substantiate their position because they don't want to promote the actual truth, which is true equality, right? Now, there might be some benefits to what they're doing on a psychological level and way have you help people get through their problems. Way have no different than if you went to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or a sociologist, or way have you to help them. They would help you help yourself to a degree, but they're helping themselves. They're no different than the church, the modern church. They're basically utilizing certain level of principles, partial truths, to get the money out of your pocket and make you feel better about yourself when they are no better than you are and everything else. So when it comes to like my recent issue, it was a simple traffic violation, right? I accidentally went through a stop sign, and I had no idea that you could accidentally go through a stop sign a little bit unreasonably fast. So that was the first time I ever got cited for going through a stop sign unreasonably fast, because I know I wasn't speeding. I was within the speed limit. But it was a citation too. But the principle here, when it comes down to everything, is that I was asserting my rights, right? Because if you don't assert your rights, when law enforcement you're encountering law enforcement. Now, typically, historically, I've never had a problem with police. I have police in my family, right? But at this particular point, I decided to assert my rights. Why? Because it's been troubling me for quite some time. Ever since I started becoming a Messianic Jew, literally within the first year or so, I suddenly started being pulled over for ridiculous things by the police. It's like, okay, why am I suddenly being pulled over? Is it because I'm affiliated with Black Hebrew Israelites and what have you? Is somebody watching me and they're trying to whatever? Or maybe is it just coincidental? Who knows, right? Because I know what I was being pulled over was just for bullcrap. As for like, well, my license plate light was out and more stuff, simple stupid things, right? So it's like, all right, well, whatever. Get the bulb fixed, the citation goes away. I don't even go to court. They waive the court because I repaired the car, right? So on and so forth. So simple things, but nevertheless, so I'm cordial with them and everything like that. But then it came to other situations where it's like, you know what, may have went through a stop sign, but there's no harm, no foul, there's nobody injured, no, or what have you. I simply didn't see the stop sign, was issued a citation for it and what have you. And the other aspect, again, being a Messianic Jew, understanding the concept of the calendars and what have you, is the calendars that they use, right? So September, October, November, and December in Gregorian calendar is the 9th, 10th, and 11th, and 12th month consecutively. But when it comes to the penalty of perjury on the tickets and what have you, and that's back when they're allowing you to write it recently, I don't see that as being an option anymore. But I would write out, especially if it was during one of those months, that, look, bottom line is, if you're saying, want me to write this down as under penalty of perjury, then here you go. Let's say here's the baseline principle, is I don't like this dating system that you're using, because, say for instance, I got the citation in December or what have you. You want me to proclaim December to be the 12th month when it literally means the 10th. That's perjury in a court of law. And so I'd write stuff like that on the back of the citation, right? It's alright, well, that's just one of the many aspects. It's like, alright, well, I'll let it slide my have you. I had said my piece on the back of the ticket. They sent me my plea offer and what have you. I paid out the plea offer, didn't show up to court, right? So I'll get to that in a minute too, because the citation, again, when it came to this, what's going on, I'll have to discuss that. But nevertheless, it was something that was eating away at me a little bit, based on the fact that the principle that they're trying to instill the calendar with me. Now, if we live in a free society, then I shouldn't be obligated to follow the calendar that the majority use, right? So I've also heard the issues historically about the Social Security number being utilized, going up to the court of law and what have you, and all these different issues with that aspect of things. And then obviously with the one business refusing to service, make a cake, in other words, for a gay wedding, they get shunned and wave. The state's coming after them for their religious principles. It's like, okay, well, what authority does the state have to come over after anybody for their religious principles, right? And then you look at what happened with Duck Dynasty and what have you, and all these different things, and you see that it's progressive. It's been progressively going this way for quite some time now. Back in the 90s, while I was growing up, you had Ruby Ridge. I didn't understand that they're Messianic Jews until more recently, within the last 5 years or more. But nevertheless, it's still, principles do apply. That obviously caused my religious side of my family a little bit of a concern and what have you, which ultimately led down to me. I have similar concerns. It's like, all right, you look at what happened at Waco, same concept. Because if you look at the First and Second Amendment, it's limitations on government, not the people, right? That's what the Constitution is. It's limitations on the government, right? It's limiting government, right? Not the people. People are sovereign. So in modern culture and what have you have a lot of police that are going around proclaiming, well, they're a sovereign citizen, they're a sovereign citizen. It's, yes, the people are sovereign in the United States. We are called kings and queens and what have you. In regards to the government can't govern us without our consent. So if there's no injury caused to another citizen or their respective property, then the government should not be involved at all, because that's the purpose of the government, is to interact, bring peace and order when there's conflict between citizens, and not obviously commerce and what have you to a degree as well. But they've also went too far into that aspect of everything as well, because again, even the freedom of exercise applies to commercial aspects of everything. So when it comes to the state nationals and what have you, that I've only recently became familiar with based on another citation I had and what have you, and me posting videos on TikTok. It's like, all right, well, their dynamic is that case law where it says clearly that it's a fundamental right of what have you to travel rather than driving. Travel freely, because driving is commercial, traveling is not. And it's like, well, bottom line is you still have a right to life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness. So you have a right to make a living, right? So even if you're doing anything commercial in your capacity in your vehicle, if you're to put it into a historical context, if you had a wagon full of wood or what have you that you're taking to the market to go sell or what have you, which in turn is commercial in aspect, then what authority does the government have to step in and say, well, you have to have this kind of license plate and everything else on your vehicle? They don't, right? Because they're regulating your lifestyle, how you're living. Now, if what you're doing commercially impacts other people, say for instance you're selling toxins and what have you, and those toxins can cause harm to them and what have you, that's where the government has the ability to regulate commerce, because now you're doing something that could harm somebody else, right? That's where, again, they're overstepping their authority. They don't recognize that they are put in a place for a reason, because now the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is being shunned in favor of their vanities, right? So that's the principle of the court case and wave that I'm having, because again, I just accidentally went through a stop sign. There's no harm to anybody, right? Citation itself says that I injured the society, right? It's a whole safety concern, right? But the safety concern, the principle of law enforcement, is they have an oath of office to the Constitution, not to state laws and statutes, right? So if anything, per the United States Constitution, Article 6, Section 2 is in violation of the constitutional standard, that's Marbury versus Madison, that's automatically null and void, right? Because it has to be working with the United States Constitution, because again, Article 6, Section 2 is the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So states do not have sovereignty over the people. The people still have sovereignty. No matter where you are sovereign to the state as well as the United States, right? So that's the aspect that they have. The principle in their mind is that they are the authority, and that's where they're going wrong, is they think that they are the authority rather than being public servants. They're public servants for a reason. Judicial branch, public servants. Executive branch, public servants. Congress and legislature, public servants. They're all public servants. They all have an oath of office to the Constitution. You have to go back to the Magna Carta and everything else, the various things, to where basically the sheriffs and what have you were in violation of the laws of the land. They're doing their own thing, and that causes strife within the community, within the people, within society, which caused them to rebel, right? And based on their rebellion, you had the Magna Carta, you had the Charter of the Forest, right? Then you had everything that went on in America with I have to look back, laws of the Duke. I forget what exactly it is in New York State, but basically that same principles, that the monarchy was in violation of the laws, the Constitution that was written, and what have you, for the colonies, and that ultimately led America to rebel against the monarchy, right? So if they're not upholding their oath of office, that Constitution, because the Constitution, again, is the supreme law of the land, it's going to cause people to rebel. That's why you have all this different various... I understand the Democrat demographic, where they're going for a strong centralized government, but you have to keep in mind that the people that they're voting into office and what have you, they're not upholding their end of the bargain to that oath of office of the Constitution, right? So if they're in violation of their oath of office of the Constitution, under the pretense of what they're doing is for the safety of the society, they are violating the safety of the society, because the safety of the society is their individual rights and freedoms. And if you're violating their rights and freedoms, then you're going to cause a rebellion, a legitimate rebellion. It's not an insurrection or anything like that. It's deposing the corruption within the government, which is the Second Amendment. So on the First Amendment level, and again, when it comes to that free exercise, and you see a lot of people exercising and getting shunned for it, and you have it all likewise being done on the freedom of speech aspect. Well, what you're doing is hate speech because it hurts my feelings. It's like, no, you can hurt anybody's feelings, and they can, if their feelings are hurt, sure, if the person's working for a corporation, what have you, then it could hurt the corporation's image and blah blah blah, and then they're losing profits and everything else. But that doesn't make a difference, because the corporation, or the company, in other words, doesn't have any rights that supersede the rights of the people. So this has been ongoing for a long period of time. Even when I was an employee, to where they wanted you to have contracts that what you would write out, you would agree to, social media contracts, to where whenever you said anything online or whatever that's controversial, then you'd have to write a disclaimer that says, well, this is not a reflection of the company or anything like that. As a disclaimer, it's like, no, because you're limiting the freedom of speech of the person, and outside of the place of employment, you're basically treating them like they're slaves outside of their roles. They're only working for the company to make a living. That's how, unfortunately, the way things work in modern society is most people have to be employees. They're now a part of the system, right? They're basically put into control, to where it's no different than how there's all the monarchy and what have you. You had the barons and the lords and everything else that were controlling the people. It's the same concept reinstilled with people that have money. They create these businesses, then they control the population through their policies, but they're negating the law in process, right? So it's been something that's ongoing. It's not just like a police dynamic. It's not a judge dynamic. It's not a United States government dynamic. It's everybody dynamic. It's a matter of control, and knowledge is power, right? As they want to permeate everything anyway. The promotion of science. Science means knowledge. And therefore, if you have this degree, suddenly you must be a deity of sorts, right? You're omnipotent, and you have all this knowledge and everything else. You're a deity. Right? No different than Nimrod was a deity. No different than Semiramis was a deity. No different than Tammuz was a deity. No different than Emperor Constantine was a deity, right? As much, and same with Ra and all the pharaohs and everything else, because they have to have this pretentious notion that they are the leaders, right? So in America, again, when it comes to elected officials, look at the concept that they are the elect, right? president-elect, all these different people that are the elect when they get elected, right? Versus the biblical aspect, if you're obedient to Yahweh and His 10 Commandments, you are the elect, you are the chosen, right? The chosen. So they get chosen by vote of the people, right? So a lot of it is mirroring what the Bible is, right? But the difference is, it's not a matter of adherence to the law of the land of Israel, in this case, where the 10 Commandments, in other words, they're adhering to laws that are man-made and what have you. But if those man-made laws violate your rights under that First Amendment, or under the First Amendment, the free exercise, Congress can't create a law that prohibits the free exercise, nor can they establish a religion, in other words, by forcing anybody to abide by a secular law that violates their First Amendment right, free exercise, in other words. In my dynamic, it's a matter of a complete separation of church and state, where the state has no literal authority over me because they're secular. So when they are making secular laws that are in contradiction to my free exercise of being free from secular laws and secular control, then those laws are automatically null and void, and that would include traffic citations. Because again, the safety of the people is their rights under the Constitution, not laws and what have you that dictate safety, public health and safety, based on secular principles, because that's secular principles. If I cause no harm to person or property, therefore I have not violated a law, because again, it's a matter of being obedient to Yahweh and His 10 Commandments, and anything that's in addition to those 10 Commandments is them trying to be a deity themselves. They want to instill moral law, and in instilling moral law, trying to instill moral law, that's blasphemy, right? That's prohibiting my free exercise, right? That's the concept that they're neglecting when they do this, because that's a First Amendment violation, right? So a lot of people that I've seen in a similar dynamic that are Messianic Jews that get traffic citations and what have you, they argue the 13th Amendment and everything else to a degree. I've seen their paperwork that they had, but they neglect the First Amendment. It's like, look, you need to put down that First Amendment, free exercise, because even if you're wrong in your aspirations to become to purify your heart, the government shouldn't be involved in your affairs, because you are trying to become a better person, versus trying to instill secular law, which is making you a worse person. And they're trying to force you to hate everybody, and they're treating you like you are property to them. So when it comes to the state nationals and the American nationals, I guess, and all the people that are proclaiming sovereign citizens and way, they have their dynamic and how to deal with all the capital letters, names, and everything else. Me personally, I again go by Obadiah, which in Hebrew translates to servant of Yah. So I might do a writ of rescission on the traffic citation, what have you, and the obstruction, which is ultimately what they also pushed on me when it came to this, because I'm going to assert my name, and that was what I was trying to assert initially throughout the whole interaction, is my name, right? Because the obstruction was failure to identify. Actually, they didn't even tell me that it was a matter of failure to identify until I went to a psych eval. So to give you the details on this situation, again, this is where people go wrong more often, because you have to keep in mind that you have the Constitution, which all government officials should be abiding by with their oath of office. And if they're in violation of their oath of office, that falls under American jurisprudence under unconstitutional acts. You have no obligation to obey a law that is unconstitutional. So if Congress creates a law that violates your rights, you have no obligation to follow that law, right? And likewise, a judge, nor a police officer, or anybody else, any other official, isn't obligated to enforce that law. The executive branch nor the judicial branch. So that's all three powers don't have that authority. So Congress would pass that law, then it's up to the executive branch to enforce that law, and up to the judicial branch to judge in accordance with that law. But if that law is in violation of your civil rights, it's automatically null and void. That's Marbury versus Madison. That's American jurisprudence under unconstitutional acts, rather, where it even indicates clearly that all citizens of the United States have the militia duty, right? And that's in the Constitution as well. Look that up. I don't know if it's quite clearly as evident in the United States Constitution. I have to get into that aspect of everything yet. I'm still working on a lot of other dynamics. But it is definitely in the New York State Constitution. It states quite clearly, I think it's Article 12 or 13, somewhere around there, 11 maybe, that it states all citizens of New York State are a part of the militia, right? So when it comes to these arguments, when it comes to gun laws and what have you, they're automatically null and void. And people aren't asserting their rights. They're trying to go, well, we need the NRA and everything else to do this. And then out in New York State, they bankrupted the NRA because the NRA was trying to teach people how to use weapons and everything else, use guns, in other words. But it's the right to bear arms. It's not the right to bear guns. So all the arguments that they have about, well, back then they had muskets and everything else, and it doesn't state quite clearly that you could use a semi-automatic or an automatic machine gun. That's the thing with Waco and what have you. Again, it's that Second Amendment. So if they banned that a weapon, a machine gun, which the military is allowed to use, again, that's the military is the organized militia. That's the organized militia. The United States citizen and all the citizens of the respective states and those that are aspiring to become citizens of the states, the United States, are automatically the unorganized militia, right? So when it comes to well-regulated militia, the aspect of that, the regulated aspect is the laws of the land and what have you, which are in the books about the organized militia and the unorganized militia. Both of them are on the books. So you have, again, the military, and you go to posse comitatus, where they basically negated the ability of the military to enforce law in the land during the Reconstruction period. So the military can't be deployed on the United States soil, and then you have the executive branch, the police, in other words, your local law enforcement, the state police, all the various dynamics of the police or peace officers and what have you. They cannot be a part of the militia. When they sign up to be a police officer, they cannot be a part of the militia. That's on the books as well. So it's the other part of the executive branch, the United States citizen, the state citizens, to enforce the Constitution. That's the militia duty. So because the organized militia has been basically shackled to where they cannot be deployed on American soil to enforce constitutional standards. So it's up to the citizens to enforce those constitutional standards, because we are the executive branch. They are not the authority. We are the authority. The people have that sovereignty. That's what people are neglecting. So when it came to these places of employment, what have you, one other co-worker of mine was proclaiming he doesn't have any respect for the authority. And he was actually former military in the Army and what have you too. It's a matter of he's not respecting the authority, because again, the United States citizen is the sovereign of the United States. Corporations, everything else, they cannot take away your rights. Your rights supersede their corporate policies, right? And that's where people are going wrong. You have all these different school boards and everything else trying to indicate that, well, you elected me into this office, therefore I could limit your speech during these meetings and what have you, and if you're hurting our feelings, we'll have you arrested by the police, the executive branch. And when they're doing that, when the police are arresting a citizen, a United States citizen, for utilizing their First Amendment right and petitioning the government with their grievances in an open forum, in a public setting, that's a violation, a blatant, clear violation of the First Amendment rights by the people that have oath of office of that Constitution, by people that were elected into their positions, by people that don't have that authority to deprive a person of their rights under any condition, right? That's Title 18, Section 242, utilizing the color of law to deprive people of their rights. So it's not just a matter of race or what have you. If you're given a right under the Constitution or otherwise, that right cannot be violated by public servants. Elected or appointed, it does make a difference. A deputy might not have an oath of office that they file, but a deputy to the sheriff, in other words, but they are under the responsibility of the sheriff under his oath of office. And again, if they're violating their oath of office, they can be removed from their respective positions because, again, they're public servants. That's misconduct. And again, going back to unconstitutional acts under American jurisprudence, that is a crime. That's correlates to Title 18, Section 242. It is a crime for them to do that if they're working in their official capacity. You can go to the Justice Department's own website and validate that. It states quite clearly that it's applicable to the police, to judges, to public health care professionals, all the different dynamics. Any public official, anybody working in their official capacity that is depriving a United States citizen of a right granted to them by the Constitution or otherwise, or any other law, they cannot do that. It is a literal crime. Depending on the severity of that crime, it's up to a year in prison. But in my case, my dynamic where I was actually literally arrested, that's kidnapping. That's false imprisonment and everything else. Literally kidnapping. That's up to 25 years. Not to mention everything else that they did. That's even substantially more. And they are personally responsible for that. I could put them in prison for what they did. And that's what people aren't understanding. You got to assert your rights. If you don't assert your rights, you lose your rights. Because the cops don't know your rights. They know the state laws and statutes because, again, they have an oath of the Constitution to support it, but they don't do that. They most likely are looking at state laws and statutes when it comes to traffic laws and what have you, and they're not putting it in perspective that they're violating your rights. And when they're in violating of your rights, it doesn't matter what the case laws and what have you are, and I'll cite case law and what have you to substantiate my claim, but I don't need the case law. I don't need the United States codes. I don't need that because I understand that by violating my rights, they are committing treason. They are in violation of their oath of office to the Constitution. They are not protecting and defending. On the federal level, it's Title 5, Section 3331, their oath of office that all federal public servants have to have. That would be included of the FBI, the CIA, and everything else, which shouldn't be, the CIA shouldn't be operating on American soil either. But they are, according to, from what I'm gathering a little bit here. I haven't confirmed that, so don't take me at that value. But if you listen to Jesse the Body Ventura, which is a former governor, where he states clearly that the CIA informed him that they are operating on American soil, I have to take him at face value. I don't necessarily believe everything that he's saying, but looking at everything that's going on in America, to where the FBI is blatantly violating the civil rights of the people, the First Amendment freedom of speech, and with the censorship on Twitter, on Facebook, and what have you, right? That's a blatant violation of their oath of office, because they have an oath of office to the Constitution as well. Go to the FBI's website. It states quite clearly that we live in a democracy. We don't live in a democracy. If you do the Pledge of Allegiance, the Pledge of Allegiance is the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, right? So that we live in a constitutional republic. And that's why they have an oath of office to the Constitution. We live in a republic. Our rights supersede their authority, right? So that's where they're going wrong prominently in modern society, is because they want to be dictators and be authoritarian. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, right? They're all in violation of the rights. Now when it comes to the Democrat side of things, they're literally creating Jim Crow laws to give people rights such as T identity and what have you. Now keep in mind that the principles of true Christianity is you love everybody unconditionally, but when it comes to them renaming things to birthing parent and everything else, and all these different laws in regards to gender identity and everything else, that's actually going up against the people that would have that oath of office too, and trying to get them out of their positions, because now people that are judges and lawyers and what have to abide by their gender identity. They have to use proper pronouns. If they don't use proper pronouns, which is perjury in a court of law, then they can be convicted of a hate crime, right? So that's one way that it's being utilized, these laws, to go up against judges and attorneys and what have you, to get them out of their position and put people that are on the liberal mentality into those positions, because now they created a law that those people could utilize the same principle of Title 18, Section 242 as a principle, even though they are psychotic in nature. It's literally under mental hygiene laws that they are psychotic, they're idiotic, and they suffer from gender dysphoria. But to me, it's a matter of, I don't see it necessarily as that. I see it as a ploy to overthrow the government, because they want to instill their socialist agenda. And keep in mind, again, on the biblical aspect of things, it is socialism, but it's a matter of principle. It's a matter of not bearing false witness. So that's an attack on the church, and consequently also the United States government, and trying to overthrow the government through policies and laws that are contrary to the United States Constitution, because the servants themselves have, even though they have oath of office of the Constitution, they have rights no different than everybody else. They might be public servants, but they have rights too. So if their rights are being violated under the color of law, and they're being mandated to abide by these rules and principles that are unconstitutional, then those rules and what have you need to be nipped in the bud too. Now, they can use gender neutral pronouns. Like me, I would be using some that are probably not so nice for people to hear, but that's how I would indicate that to them, that look, I have no obligation. I am not a public servant. I am not here to please you and your feelings. If you don't like the pronouns that I'm using to describe you, because I see that you're happen to be a certain gender and you want to proclaim yourself to be the opposite, I'm still going to utilize those other terms that you might find offensive. And if you find it offensive, you don't have the right to come after me, because your rights don't supersede my rights, my First Amendment rights. You're trying to force me to lie to appease your feelings, right? So that might work on public servants in a court of law, and again, on the dynamic of the perjury and what have you, and the woke identity issue that they're having. You have to keep in mind that woke identity, that's a direct attack on the church, not than evolution theory is, right? Because I didn't encompass that when I did the video on evolution theory and Big Bang theory, but that's basic bottom principle of evolution theory, is to be contrary to the Bible, right? So to give you a little bit of historical perspective, I don't see all Freemasons as being bad. Some of them might have good intentions and they understand things from a different dynamic more than the majority, but a lot of them are on the satanic principles of everything, right? So you look at George Washington, he was a slave owner, and he was a Freemason. You had Benjamin Franklin, which was affiliated with the Hellfire Club out of Ireland, where their motto was "Do as thou wilt." They performed satanic rituals underneath the church, not understanding that the church above them was just as equally satanic. Again, refer to my video to where I validate that modern Christians are Christians and what have you, right? So that said, the Freemasons supported the Democrats supported the KKK, and instilled Jim Crow laws, right? So when it comes to the 13th Amendment, keep in mind that what that did is it basically made the government the authority when it comes to slavery. It didn't abolish slavery, right? Because if you're convicted of a crime and what have you, then under due process of law, you can become a slave to the government. That's where it switched it to where instead of having individual slaves, like somebody like George Washington could have slaves or what have you, it now made it to where the government can have slaves. So if they convict you of a crime, in other words, they create laws and what have you, Jim Crow laws and what have you, they can imprison you and you become a slave, right? So again, assert your rights. Because you are not a slave, you are a sovereign citizen. You are a citizen of the United States, or if you're aspiring to be, then you are part of the militia. You are to enforce that Constitution, right? So all these laws that are in contrary to that constitutional standards are automatically null and void. That includes traffic citations waived, where there's no injury caused to personal property. If there's no victim, then there is no crime, right? So they're trying to make you a slave to their mentality. That's the other aspect. It's a matter of they're trying to control your thoughts. So, carrying on, anyway. So Title 18, Section 242, that's color of law. You have all these other things, and I'm going to have it all on my website, just like with the other videos. I link out to the website, and I'm going to post everything on the website. On the website, as it stands currently, I have one of the initial documents that I created for my legal defense that goes through all the different U.S. codes and what have you, treason, everything else, all these various dynamics, as well as the United States Constitution, New York State Constitution to a limited degree, what have you, all these different things where they're actually in violation of the law, but they're trying to make me think that I'm in violation of the law, because again, they're trying to enforce state statute and not abiding by their oath of office of the Constitution. So again, that's where I'm supplementing everything with case law and what have you too, just to justify, look, you have the Supreme Court, all these different superior courts, they have all these different case laws that haven't been overturned or what have you, that asserts the exact same principles that I'm asserting with you, and I don't need the case laws, because again, I can read quite clearly for myself the United States Constitution. It's in plain English. It's not complicated. You don't need a lawyer to explain it to you. So that's the other thing, is that when I'm arguing my case, they want me to have a lawyer. They don't think I'm competent enough, right? And so even though the court originally, when I was there for a different traffic citation, was very pro having people represent themselves pro se, the new assistant district attorney, it doesn't want people to represent themselves. They want to enforce a lawyer, and that's what her principle was. So even though I gave her that document, which you can go to my website and find under legal defense, it has a lot of information where she's in violation of the law, and the cops, what they did was in violation of the law, and I'll post the emails as well. All the information I'll post online, because it's my freedom, right? I have the First Amendment right to do that. So it doesn't matter even if a judge tried to give me a gag order or what have you, it wouldn't make a difference, because my rights supersede the thought processes of the judge and what have you, because again, my rights supersede the authority of the state, all the different branches. So gag orders in that sense could be unconstitutional. All the rules and procedures of the court, if they're, and I've recently looking at the codes, judicial code of the New York State and what have you, again, in certain cases, I think in the appellate courts and what have you, if they create rules and procedures, they have that ability to create their own rules and procedures. But if those rules and procedures are contrary to the Constitution, then they're automatically null and void. That's also within the judicial code of New York State, right? So understanding the laws, that's where I'm debunking everything in that level and that dynamic, because it's again a matter of asserting your rights. So going back with all the traffic citations, because again, this has been wearing on my mind for a while. So one other situation, I haven't even gotten my own court case yet. The recent one is another issue that caused this, is I accidentally hit a police car while I was driving past the police car on the left-hand side of the police car, right? So when I did that, obviously everything got recorded and what have you. He called the sheriff's office. Sheriff's office came in, brought up a report and what have you. I wasn't going to deny fault or what have you, but it's like, all right, well, whatever. You don't have to get the police involved, especially with them being a police officer, but I guess with it being a government agency and that, they might want to have everything documented. But in that process, the sheriff gave me a traffic citation. He wasn't there. He wasn't a witness to what happened. And on top of it, the citation said clearly in the title, pass on right. It's like, okay, well, if I was passing on right of the police car, which was here, and I hit over here, this is the right-hand side, I couldn't have been passing on the right, especially when over here was brush and bushes and trees. It wasn't even a possibility. So that was me again, the first time I ever asserted my First Amendment right in a court of law, not the first time I ever went to trial in a court of law, because I was asserting my right because that's me, them trying to get me to lie under oath. Again, I was writing in all those citations under penalty of perjury, the concept that December is being proclaimed to be the 12th month when it literally means the 10th. So it's like, yeah, that's perjury in a court of law. That's unlawful, especially if you have me take an oath during this interaction to state the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? So I'm stating truth and facts, and I got an objection by the district attorney, the prosecutor, in other words, because I was asserting my First Amendment right, and I kind of called him out on that, and he shut up after that, right? And the judge said, I'll allow it. When it came to me asserting my First Amendment right, now I may have been babbling, I may have been rambling out, because again, I don't know how to go about asserting my rights more properly, but they should have been listening to what I was saying, because again, I went through where Yeshua was a Jew that proclaimed salvation as other Jews for John 4:22. I went through Romans 2, and the whole principle that I was arguing in that case wasn't necessarily the separation of church and state. I was indicating that I am obligated not to lie. You're trying to force me to lie in a court of law, especially when I have this oath that you want me to take, that I'm supposed to be tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Here I am telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, my rights. And the judge was getting impatient with me, right? And eventually did his thing and what have you. And now keep in mind, they're on my left-hand side at that time too, the police officer as well as the attorney, the prosecutor. And at the time I did have something in my ear that I didn't even know that was there. It was probably there since I was a teenager years and what have you. So when they're speaking, to me it was more like mumbles, and I didn't exactly hear everything that they said. So when it came to light that the judge, and he basically accepted that because the code itself does more or less correlate to what did happen. So even though it said in the title of it, pass on right, if you look at the actual traffic violation code that they used, in the definition within the information, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was passing on right. It was more a matter of passing and not being able to do it successfully, and which caused injury. So in that sense, but again, it was a matter of that's computer. That's something that should have been dismissed based on that technicality anyway. But it's like, all right, well, so when the judge said that aspect of it, I went, well, okay, well, if I knew that, then I would have wouldn't have wanted to trial. I would have taken the plea offer, right? So that's where they kind of also shuffled their feet and what have you, because they're restricted in their capacity to do what they can. They probably wanted to help me too at that point, because they're like, oh shit, we really did something wrong, right? But they can't say anything because they have their obligations, they have their conduct. The judge cannot practice law, and because the judge can't practice law, he can't indicate to me what I should be doing. He might give me a little bit of guidance, push here or there, but he can't practice law. And because he can't practice law, he can't give me legal advice or anything like that. So he may have wanted to dismiss the case too, but it's still a matter of me asserting my rights and knowing what I'm doing in a court of law. Because if you don't know what you're doing in a court of law, then they have their principles that they have to abide by too, and follow those protocols, right? The rules of the court and what have you, right? So that's the aspect that I was missing out on. So I felt alienated and what have you. And then eventually a year down the road, I did contact the DMV about it and what have you, because it did cause complications in certain other areas of my life to have that on my driving record and what have you. So the DMV actually told me to contact somebody else within the DMV, and then I just said, oh well, whatever. I'm going to turn the other cheek. I'm going to let it slide again, right? Because that's the principle. But if you looked at, again, the principles of being one of the chosen, one of the Yahweh's elect and what have you, is he has our back. So as much as I might not be able to indicate things clearly in a court of law, I also take it under the principle that everything happens for a reason, right? So eventually when the judge was a modern Christian, wave, you could read up on him and wave. I'll provide that information online, wave. His name was John out of Leroy, New York. You could probably find the rest, and you can probably search up and see that he was taken to court for child abuse, right? I don't know whatever happened with that case or what have you. He was actually jailed, I think, for a limited period of time, because there's a photo of him in like a suit, a prisoner suit or what have you. And the lawyer, his lawyer, because he did hire a lawyer, was screaming about Democrat politics and what have you. Because again, I was asserting my First Amendment right, free exercise. So if he would have listened to what I was saying, he had that same principle, that same right, that he was ignoring my right in the court of law. Ultimately, push come to shove, months later, not that long after, about a few months after, and I didn't know, I wasn't aware until I was contacting the DMV and what have you, and that he was I wouldn't say it was, I don't know what the circumstances are, but obviously you can correct your own children on a biblical level, and you look at all the dynamics with CPS and what have you, with child abuse and everything else, and you'll see that that's corrupt. It's a matter of the Democrats, again, trying to have authority and control over the people. So he had his First Amendment rights too, that which were being violated. I think, as far as I'm aware, he's still a judge in Leroy, and I didn't want to go after him because he had that to where that could have gotten him removed. But again, that's his First Amendment right? So he shouldn't have been removed on that principle. So, like I said, so carrying on. So he had that caused conflict and strife and made me think that, well, I'm more property. Now, if you look at the other aspect, that when I was wrongfully terminated from a company, a corporation, and again, a corporation has to abide by the laws of the land as well, the rights of the people. They wrongfully terminated me, and I could have prosecuted and went after the people, but I didn't have enough evidence at my disposal at the time to come after them. And I was actually gathering evidence to a degree as well, and I still have it on my computer. I actually had enough to where I think it's past the statute of limitations to where I can't go after them civilly for it, but nevertheless, it's like, all right, well, whatever. I let it slide because that's the whole principle, is turn the other cheek. So I did contact a lawyer during that issue for wrongful termination, and he had affiliations with, he went to Cornell, and his wife, I think, is an Ashkenazi Jew or an Orthodox Jew. So I was bringing it to his attention that they're coming after me based on my religious observance and what have you, but I didn't have enough evidence. So he was waiting on me to provide him with evidence, and me being because it was causing a lot of complications, being terminated like that, I had no way to support myself, so I had to make a lot of moves, a lot of changes, right, to get me, and I was eventually evicted from my apartment as well because I couldn't afford to pay rent, right? I didn't have a job or anything like that, so I had to go live with my brother. So I had a lot of things going on. So when I was contacting the lawyer without the evidence at my disposal and having also trying to follow my biblical principle of doing no harm to those that harm and persecute me, that's where I had to throw it back at the lawyer. It's like, look, yeah, he ultimately was saying that he wasn't going to pursue with the case and help me out in that situation. And when I responded, I thanked him and whatever, but I also said that, look, I'm going to have to let Yahweh deal with it, right? And there was things that happened at that company too later on that, again, because Yahweh has your back, right? I won't go into the details of that because to me it's mundane to a degree. But then I also had the same complications ultimately because I became a contractor for the United States Department of Veteran Affairs, had an extensive 7-year background check performed on me, validated as a Messianic Jew, and that's where the principal, when they wrongfully terminated me, because I told the HR representative and whatever, that said, well, because defamation, libel, and slander, if they're going on hearsay and they write it down on a piece of paper, the hearsay, that's actually defamation, libel, and slander. So that's the evidence. So I had her in an email confirmation, well, you threatened them physically, and physically the managers would never occurred. I actually, directly after when I was being written up, I went directly to the HR and I was telling her directly that they are doing me wrong, doing me dirty, and what have you. And then I was like, after that, not long, when I went back to my seat, the manager, one of the upper level managers, tapped me on the shoulder and they had me leave, right? And that because they're saying, well, you threatened them. They didn't tell me why. They just said that I'm on probation currently and I will get paid for it. But nevertheless, because they didn't have enough evidence at their disposal, but I didn't know what the accusation was or what have you, because again, I just got out of the HR office. But boom, Same concept. Got home, that was the whole thing. So I told her when she did that, and I was telling her that I was in contact with a lawyer and what have you too. Well, ultimately, push comes to shove. Again, I didn't have the evidence at disposal, even though that email was enough evidence that validation that they were wrongfully accusing me of something that was wrongful. And I could have sued them personally, not the corporation, because again, they're following their policy. I could have sued the managers themselves for defamation, libel, and slander, right? That would have went against them, right? So that said, like I said, I emailed back to HR. I was like, look, I'll let it slide and what have you, because again, it's a matter of turning the other cheek, but it's also a matter of if anybody asks me any questions, I'm going to be honest enough up front with them, and I'm going to tell them what the truth is, right? So again, I was hired as being as a contractor to the United States Department of Veteran Affairs, which required the security clearance of high security public trust, which requires a 7-year extensive background check and what have you. All that got documented in my paperwork for them to investigate. So and I actually, while I was wrongfully terminated, I did contact the Department of Labor, and they're ignoring the fact that they're violating my rights, because while they wanted me to work on Saturday and that's the Sabbath, I can't work on the Sabbath. And she was saying, well, that's your choice, right? Should have been doing an investigation and everything, but she was refusing to do an investigation, Department of Labor. So I mean, I may have been a little bit sassy with her when she was doing that, because she was telling me that I have to prove it myself, right? And I should to a degree, but if they're doing their investigative work and what have you, and if I took them to a court of law where they'd have to, under oath, under penalty of perjury, profess the truth, then I'd have their asses right there, right? So that's the key aspect. And she, again, when she was saying, well, you have to prove yourself and everything else, and she was basically just ignoring me is what she was doing. She was trying to mitigate having any kind of responsibility to do any kind of investigative work. So I'm like, all right, well, she got me to say some things that, yeah, they're doing it to everybody else too, but she didn't understand the context of what I was saying to them about it. It's a matter of they're falsely accusing people of things that they shouldn't, that are wrong, and terminating them illegally from their positions. So that's what I was asserting. So that's what I was asserting when it came to that law. So I told her, one, well, if you ever get raped, don't come to me for any assistance, because that's what the burden of proof would fall on you. So just to kind of get it into her head, because she wasn't listening, then I said, when it was about the matter of the laws and what have you, well, what if the company's violating laws? Who do I go to? She said, I go to OSHA, right? So I ignored it after that. I'm like, I'm not going to go to OSHA. So again, all of this was in the paperwork. In the paperwork, they have to do that 7-year extensive background check. So she went to that place of employment and was interviewing people, found out a lot of information, came back months after she conducted her investigation with her head down, saying, women give you a lot of problems, don't they? I kind of chuckled, because she obviously didn't uncover all the managers that were men that were giving me the same issue. Now, in that same dynamic, I started originally with one manager. They had a upper level manager above her, right? And they're very friendly with me, and I'm a good worker. I was one of the best in the department, and they gave me a lot of all these different responsibilities. Then I became a Messianic Jew, and then everything started changing. Suddenly, this manager here didn't want me to be observant to the Sabbath and what have you, was causing complications. And so I had to go up to the next level manager, which forced her to abide by me observing the Sabbath and what have you. And so she moved to a different department. A new manager came in. This manager was trying to cause a lot of complications, bearing false witness and scapegoating me for problems to get me out of my position. And that other manager too, this one up here, the second level manager, left for another company too, which put another manager that was above her in her place to have that authority. So that it was working in unison against me in a sense. And they knew that I was a hard worker and wave, and they gave me a raise, and I was working 2 jobs at the time too, again, because I wasn't making ends meet with one job, so I had to work a part-time job. So they were causing complications and deliberately trying to cause complications to get me out of my job, right? So this manager she crossed the line in a certain aspect, ultimately, and brought it to the attention of the next level manager. They actually literally just gave me the raise and what have you. And boom, I proved that she was scapegoating me for things and throwing me under the bus for things that weren't my fault to make herself look better. And then boom, she's no longer that manager. So we didn't went without a manager for a period of time until they hired another manager. That other manager, hearing the word on the grapevine with the other people that were working in my department, where that same guy that says you don't respect the authority and what have you, former military and what have you, in the Army, and again my uncle was first sergeant military, police, outranked him and what have you on this dynamic. He was actually the one that wasn't respecting the authority. He was violating laws, but he was going behind my back to this new manager, which was former military as well, under the Army, which was boasting the fact that he had all the security clearance and what have you, and he could work with the police and what have you, and telling me all these things. He was starting to scapegoat me too, and there was another manager that took his place, and they're arguing for their manager positions, right? And then which put that one manager that was filling that role back to her position, to where she was like a third tier manager. So they were doing their thing, right? And they're likewise trying to scapegoat me and what have you. Well, you said that to him because he's Puerto Rican or what have you, or he's from Dominican Republic. It's like I took Spanish in high school, I did, and what have you. So all this nonsense rhetoric that they kept trying to slant me, you're racist, you're this, and everything else, everything that was happening to Trump, this was before Trump ever took office, before he was running for president, right? So all that happened to me before Trump. It's like everything that's happening to Trump is something that literally happened to me before that happened to Trump. So that said, I eventually got him because he was scapegoating me for things. So when he was scapegoating for me for things, I went to, you have this manager that was above him, this manager that's above him. Then he had this level manager over here that ultimately was bringing me into his office, and I ripped him a new ass. Because again, it's a matter of equality on the principle of the thing. So if that level manager is not listening, he got his ass ripped. Because he was again, this level manager was trying to scapegoat me. Boom, and he was writing me up for not being there, absences and everything else, which I validated. I was actually there those days and what have you. And I wasn't late in certain cases too. So I was actually, he had no justification for writing me up for these things. But he was writing me up because they're trying to terminate me. Well, validated that he was wrong on certain things, he left the company, right? And then this other manager, she said, which took over his place, that they're arguing about who was going to be at her level. Basically, it was a struggle. Now, she had to fill in his position, which became manager of my department and what have you more directly. On top of all her other responsibilities, she eventually left the company too, and then her write-up, her performance review for the year, she was making comments, and it's like, okay, well, I have my ability to write comments too. So boom, I wrote my comments that she didn't like, which made her adjust her comments. But eventually she left, right? And in turn, when all this was going on, also I went to the senior HR representative, which validated that they're scapegoating me for all these different things. And that was coming up from the vice president of the branch. The head manager of the branch himself was behind it, right? So after she said that, within weeks, she was no longer in her position. So you had different HR people that were taking over. One of them tried to back me up when I was bringing up things about them scapegoating me. And he said, well, you should leave, or you should go home and what have you, take the day off with pay and what have you, and I'll deal with it. So, but I refused to do that because I knew that they're scapegoating me and what have you, and I didn't want them to have any other play on anything. So I stayed at work and I worked out my day and what have you. And then later to have that HR person say, well, I don't have the authority to do that and what have you, blah, blah, blah. So if I would have followed it, what he wanted to, because he was getting creamed on by the other managers, then they could have legitimately fired me because they're saying that he didn't have the authorization to do something like that. So it's like, all right, so following everything in the protocol and what have you. So again, now I'm going without a manager, and we had another manager from a different department that was filling in. And that third level manager that was there originally, she even left the company. And that vice president that was scapegoating me, he left the company just one day, just didn't show up anymore because they're scapegoating me. And that senior HR person was validated that they're scapegoating me off the record. I told her directly, I could be recording this conversation, you know that, right? And she said off the record that they're scapegoating me, right? So I didn't go after them and what have you. But again, that the vice president of the branch left the company, just up and boom, gone, right? So now all three of these three level tier managers gone. Manager of customer service started being the leader, so to speak, of us and what have you, and which leaves that fourth level manager, the one that I ripped the other manager about, was still there, right? He was still there. He was pretty much the head of the chief of everything at this point. So that said, with everything that was going on, there's another manager that was involved with certain things too, but I'm not going to involve her on this in that sense, because it's too much detail. But basically, you see where it's going. That I got all of these people on their own volition. They left the company. I didn't file charges against them. I didn't file lawsuits against them, anything like that, right? So eventually, they hired that other manager that came in, right? The one that finally did get me terminated, and in conjunction with the other manager, that customer service manager, they fired me, wrongfully terminated me because she was following suit with the other manager that was her predecessor and writing me up illegitimately for anything and everything, and working in conjunction with that customer service manager to write me up in this case for something because they're having me take a call that I shouldn't have been taking a call for, having the help desk take customer service calls. So I don't know all the protocols over here, but I knew that it was because we originally handled the field of those calls when we were working with that client originally. So I understood certain aspects of things. So what they're really arguing with me about is improper transfer procedure, right? So when I was wrongfully terminated, I asked another coworker that used to work in because we used to be a unit team, the customer service and help desk team worked together in unison with each other. I asked her, well, in the procedures, does it say that you have to do things this way that they're indicating that I should have been doing? She said no. She'd gone through the procedures and she said, no, it's not written in there that you should be doing that. So they couldn't write me up on that level either. But they had to terminate me based on I supposedly threatened them, even though the customer service manager literally stands about a foot or more taller than I am and is definitely a lot more built than I am. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to threaten that guy physically and wave, especially in a situation where I know I'm in the right, and I went to HR right immediately after. So there's no justification for them to do that. And there's a substantial amount of evidence for it that was supporting my position, because again, he sent out an email himself, which I was actually responding to before I was tapped on the shoulder, because he was violating the rights of the employees in that email. He was telling them that they had to do things that are unlawful. So in that, when I was trying to respond, that's when I got tapped on the shoulder, and I was terminated. Well, not terminated. I was put on suspension initially until I was terminated by HR later the following week, illegitimately, right? Because they're violating the law. And this is the banking industry, people. That's what you don't understand. I was dealing with clients, bigwig clients like Porsche, Ferrari Financial, Toyota Financial, right? People that had millions and millions of dollars in their bank account that I had access to, and I do have an eidetic memory. I could have memorized their routing numbers and their account numbers and what have you. And I could have been fraudulently using their bank accounts to pay bills and what have you, right? But that's not something I would do, because that would be committing fraud. I'm not going to break the law, right? So that said, I had a lot of documentation in my paperwork when it came to me having that security clearance. So they came back, right? And then again, she put her head down. Women give you a lot of problems, but their men were involved too, right? So it wasn't just the women, it was the men too. The women were following the men because they were issued orders by the men to do certain things, and they're just following suit, right? So when it came to this place of employment, when I was a contractor there at the VA, same concept. You had the managers struggling with each other. One manager ultimately got fired and terminated just while I was actually still in process of training for the job and what have you. Then he had one that was a female trainer and what have you, that she was throwing me under the bus at a certain point in time. And her father-in-law, I guess what he was actually the chief of police of that VA. The funny thing is, in our interactions with Avie, I told her the name of my uncle, and she gave me the name of her stepfather. I shot over the name because the name of my uncle sounded familiar to her. I shot over a text over to my uncle, and my uncle said, "Oh yeah, he's my bitch." Because again, he's first sergeant military police, which means he outranks the chief of the police of the branch. So eventually, she not understanding, she's trying to teach me the technology, right, and Active Directory and what have you, which was being utilized by the VA and certain tools. I'm not going to go into details about it, but she kind of threw me under the bus because she didn't understand the technology. And what I was saying on a certain phone call, that she was monitoring my phone calls, and she wanted to say that I should have been doing certain something a certain way when I was actually using a back-end tactic, because I'm very technologically advanced and what have you, so I wasn't utilizing a tool that they're giving me. I was utilizing a different protocol, which was more effective in this case, and it was based on the circumstances. I'm, again, not going to go into those details. But nevertheless, it was an effective method, and no. So she threw me under the bus, and what have you. And the one manager, the hiring person that hired me and that for the position, was coming after me to a degree, saying that yeah, I was doing so well and what have you. Now why is there suddenly a problem? This other person that didn't like me either, and he was former military, had secret security clearance and what have you, kind of throwing me under the bus too to a degree, because I wasn't doing things his way. Well, I kind of put my head down. They did kind of threaten to terminate me to a degree, but I proved my point to that manager that I was actually legitimately, I knew what I was talking about, I knew what I was doing and what have you, and he understood that, so that's why he let it slide. He's like, okay, well, they just don't know what the hell they're talking about, and he went off and did his own thing, but eventually he was fired, right? So then it brings in this other female manager that was a part of the manager from the upstairs department, right? So she was managing that upstairs department. She became the manager of all these things, and then other things were happening, and downsizing and everything else. And I'm not going to go into details and what have you. There's a transition in process. There's a few other transitions. She ends up starting scapegoating me too, right, for certain things that were not legitimate. And she was like, say for instance, I was coming into work, I was coming in on time and what have you, and she would come to my desk while I was trying to log into everything and then tell me, oh, don't worry about it, I'm at your desk and what have you. Scapegoating me, because eventually when it came to me following the holy days and what have you, she didn't want to give me that time off, saying that, well, you're coming into work late and everything. It's like, you're at my desk, and right, and under federal law in the call center, because we're under federal law, call center protocols. As soon as I press Control-Alt-Delete to log into that computer, that's when I'm logged in. Because originally the process was you would log into a phone, which would, prior to you logging into a computer, and when you log into the phone, it would clock everything, and that's how your justification for your time and everything, right? Because that's how it would work, right? So now it's a matter of they change that part of it, and now it's a matter of you have to log into your computer. So it's like, all right, well, knowing the law, Control-Alt-Delete, log into the computer. So on my timesheet, because it was still handwritten timesheet, so to speak, I mean, it was computerized, but we would clock our time, and you put in the times that you logged in, what have you, and boom, put in that time. She was like, oh, you're late there. It's like, and, well, I'm going to go to HR. It's like, by all means, go to HR. And again, other issue, you can see that it went up against HR and all these managers. It's like, I have a history of being able to get people to get out of their positions, right? So the going to HR wasn't effective for it, because HR never contacted me in regards to that. Then when it came to the holy days, I took the holy days off. She had months in advance for approval for everything, but she didn't want to approve the time off, and it was late in the year too. So it's like, well, when else am I going to be using this time, because I have a limited time frame that I have to use that time anyway. But I had to have those days off for the holy days, right? So that's my free exercise aspect. And they wanted to say, well, and they wouldn't confirm, they wouldn't approve the time off. So what ended up happening is I just took the time off, right? Those days that they didn't approve before the days actually came up, I just took them off anyway, right? What are they going to do? They have no lawful authority to say that I couldn't take the holy days off because they had months in advance. They had no justification. So HR and what have you, and she came after me. Well, based on your tardies and everything else, it's like, I wasn't tardy. Don't give me that bullshit. But they tried to indicate, well, based on your tardy, next time when you have a holy days, we might not approve them. And it's like, you have to approve them anyway, right? Well, a hardship on the company and everything else under the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1968, they're trying to utilize that. Well, it would cause undue hardship. It's like, you had months in advance. I give you months in advance to plan in advance for the days that I'm taking off. But you don't want to give them to me because you want to have that level of control, right? So again, based on certain dynamics and that, again, they were coming after me. They had a legitimate reason that they would have terminated me in this particular case to a degree. But at that point in time, there's a limited amount of time that everybody in that branch, in my division, for that branch of the VA, weren't going to be in a position anyway, right? There's literally a few weeks left. So the only thing in me retaining that job would have had is I would have gotten a few extra $1,000 in my pocket for staying until the end. So at that point, so when it came to people and giving phone calls and they're giving me attitude and what have you, it didn't matter if they're DOD or anything like that. If they're giving me attitude unjustifiably and what have you, to a degree, and I understand their frustrations based on the circumstances because they're dealing with that transition too. But nevertheless, it's like, okay, well, I can't deal with this. I have to get on to the next call. I have to keep things rolling because of the way things were working. Again, I'm not going to go into details. But if you're causing complications because you don't want to listen to what I'm saying, then I'm going to have to pass you off you can go up to my managers or what have you if you want and try to get me fired. But here's the thing. We only have a few weeks left until I'm out of here anyway, right? So whatever kind of thing. They weren't able to terminate me because the VA, in that sense, based on somebody was complaining and what have you, based on circumstance, because they weren't listening. They wanted to think, well, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm not going to go into the dynamics, what have you. But nevertheless, the VA wanted to have me removed from the contract, which ultimately means that I wouldn't have be an employee. But so as much as they may have were trying to get me terminated, when they indicated that I was told that the VA wants me removed from the contract, that's when I emailed HR and waving and said, yep, I quit. I'm not going to wait for everything else, everything's happening, whatever, gone. And I was actually doing what I'm doing now as an independent contractor anyway on the side. That just became my full-time job, and it's always been my full-time job since because of that level of control, right? Maintain that control. So going back with the police and now all the different dynamics. So I've been dealing with being discriminated against in places of employment with the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1968 being violated. Look at what happened with COVID. They're doing the exact same thing, violating the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1968 by mandating people to get vaccinated, mandating people to wear masks, even though the science indicated that the masks were ineffective. But let's have everybody wear masks anyway, even though they're ineffective, which actually caused a lot more complications, right? And then with the way they handled everything, and then you added the slant, well, it's the Republicans and way over there killing everybody, despite the fact that New York State had the highest death toll out of all the states for at least a year, if not longer. And Andrew Cuomo had his little escapade with having the people that had COVID being treated in nursing homes, and which the nursing, it doesn't make sense if you know that the people that are elderly that have immune deficiencies and what have you are most susceptible to death from COVID. Why are you having COVID patients being treated in nursing homes, right? Because he wants to get that death toll up because they're getting money and what have you from it. So the government in that sense is corrupt, right? So when it comes to everything that happened here and this dynamic with me being a contractor for a number of years and this everything else on the legal aspect, I got pulled over last year, over a year ago, And it was for going through a stop sign. It was a rolling stop kind of situation. I saw the cop at the intersection wavy, so I have a partial photographic memory. So I remember the instance, and I thought, well, maybe he's letting me get away with it. And the reason why I did a rolling stop to begin with is a lot of times the cops will wave you on anyway. Even if you did a full stop, he'll wave you on anyway because he's got nothing better to do. So it's like, all right, well, instead of waiting out and seeing who's going to go first and wave, I just did a rolling stop, and that way we don't have anything to worry about. While he ended up pulling me over, not too far away, have you. He didn't issue me a citation on that. I did give him my license and what have you. But this is where the complications began. Is I got a citation for a rental vehicle, which I utilized, and the rental vehicle had an inspection sticker on it that was valid for at least another few months, and I would have had it inspected, but the inspection sticker itself was still valid for a few months, and I would have had gone through the process and had it done to where the rental company would pay for it and what have you, because I have oil changes and that done through them all the time, and they pay for all the oil changes, not me out of pocket. They submit a work order and what have you for it. So it's like, all right. So he issued me a citation because on his computer system it says it was past due for a few months. It's like, all right, well, the inspection sticker itself is contrary to what you're saying, but whatever. He said, well, it's not my responsibility. Contact the rental company in regards to it, and blah, 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 and they'll take care of it. It's like, all right, well, whatever. No, whatever. So I contacted the rental company by phone, told them about it and what have you, and I didn't hear anything from anybody. I mailed in the not guilty because I'm not going to not respond to the ticket, so I mailed in not guilty, and I didn't get contacted until literally about 6 or more months later. And it had me scratching my head because 6 months later, after the citation, I had no idea what they're offering me a plea offer for. So I contacted the court, which is the same court I have my current issues with, and I told the court clerk, it's like, all right, well, this situation, the police officer himself said I'm not responsible, so why am I getting this plea officer? Well, it's not written anywhere in the notes or anything like that, so here's the number for the prosecutor and what have you. Contact them, what have you. So I contact them. I think he picked up and he sent me directly to voicemail, right? So I don't know how their system works, but I know that he initially picked up, and I heard the click to where I went, and then eventually I was in voicemail. It's like, all right, well, whatever. So I left him in voicemail, gave him the ticket number and everything else, all the information, validating that I'm not responsible for anything and what have you. On the plea offer, it says, well, if you don't respond by a certain date, then you're going to go to trial. It's like, all right, well, whatever. I gave him the information. Never got a call back from him, right? Suddenly, I get a second plea offer in the mail. It's like, all right, well, what's going on? I contact the court clerk. She gives me a little bit of ho-hums about it and what have you. Well, you're going to have to end up showing up to court anyway, all right? It's like, whatever. So they gave me, he said, well, if you don't, and the plea offer says, if you don't show up by this date, then you're going to go to trial, all right? Didn't respond to that plea offer. Showed up to court on that date, thinking I'm going to trial. Nope. Offered me the plea offer again in the court of law in front of the judge. It's like, I'm not going to accept it. I mean, I didn't respond to the first two plea offers. You think I'm going to do it in court of law? No. Right? So I made a motion to dismiss twice. Once on the principle that First Amendment assertion, right? Free exercise, what have you. It's unconstitutional. And then I went in through Yeshua's being a black Jew, proclaimed salvation as other Jews and what have you, and what they'd have to substantiate that. To me, for me to be at fault, they have to substantiate to me that you're Yahweh in the flesh. And if you can't do that, then I'm automatically not at fault, what have you, because I'm not going to accept it any other way. But before I let him respond to that motion to dismiss, I went into the other motion to dismiss, which is probably where I went wrong to a degree as well. But I told him, it's like the other odd thing is, it's a rental vehicle. I'm not responsible for inspecting a rental vehicle. The judge ignored that, said that I am responsible to inspect a rental vehicle. He probably didn't have all the information at his disposal, so I give him a little bit of credence. But again, I asserted the First Amendment right the first time on the motion to dismiss. So I told the judge directly, if you violate my right, I will have you. I can remove you from office, right? Also, in an email to the court clerk, it states quite clearly to have respect to persons is to commit sin. So that was already on the court clerk. I told her when I show up, that's going to happen. Don't expect me to respect anybody. Doesn't matter what your title is and what have you. I won't respect you. It will get biblical in there. So, right? So I left and what have you. I ended up getting a new trial date and what have you. Showed up, and the judge that's residing over my current case was the one that ended up dismissing it, because when I was called forward and what have you, he asked the DA, are the people prepared? And this is the aspect that was, it's like, okay, whatever. Why are you calling them the people? But whatever. So he said no, that they're not. So he dismissed the case and he used some code that I don't remember. But looking through everything and what have you, I was doing my research on judge immunities and what have you, trying to figure everything out. And then in process of everything, and recent when I got the other citations and everything that was happening, and I was arrested and what have you, I was looking through Title 5, Section 3331 is what somebody was asserting. And it's like, okay, well, if you're doing that, Title 5, Section 3331, is that what the judge was saying? So I'd have to go through the record and figure out if that's what he was saying, but that's my presumption is what he was saying. I think he actually said something else, something about 30 something or whatever. But either way, it gave me justification to that degree. It's like, okay, well, he dismissed the case based on that because the people weren't ready, right? So you can say that's a technicality, and you could cite it as, well, the police officer didn't show up to court, so obviously they're not going to be ready because they had no witness, right? So that said, whatever. It's the case was dismissed. Now come this other traffic citation. I was pulled over for going through a stop sign, right? And I didn't see it. Had no intent to violate a traffic law or what have you, because I see it as just general rule of thumb for just people should be aware of things, right? But I'm always, when I'm driving, aware of my surroundings. So even if I went through a stop sign, I knew that it was safe to go through that particular area. I don't know exactly what area it was, but my eyes are on the road to where I know that I'm not going to cause anybody any harm, right? So I may have missed the stop sign that applied to me, but I'm at least going through intersections. I'm looking through stop signs. I'm looking if traffic's at those intersections. So it was safe for me to do it, even if I missed that stop sign. If I happened to not see that stop sign, it was safe, right? So I got pulled over and what have you, and I asked the cop, because he was a little bit of huffy with me. It's like, what am I even being pulled over for? Because I had no idea what was up. And he said, well, this and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, if I did, then there's no harm to anybody. Because again, I'm still ticked off about what was happening, and it's been progressively occurring to where it's like, look, these things are wrongful. It seems to me like it's extortion. And watching all these videos on TikTok and what have you too, to where the police are violating the rights of the people constantly, especially when it comes to the First Amendment with CPS and everything else. The rights of the people are constantly being violated. I wanted to ensure that I'm asserting my rights, right? I want to make sure that they're abiding by their oath of office to the Constitution. So what did I start doing? I started citing the Constitution, asking them questions about the Constitution, validating that they have an oath of office to the Constitution, validating that they are public servants, and what have you, right? Because I'm asserting my rights under the Constitution. They refused to listen to what I was saying. He called backup. One guy was SWAT and what have you, came for backup. He tried to utilize Pennsylvania versus Mims to me, but again, it's Supreme Court, and I was already citing, before he was citing that, Marbury versus Madison. Anything that's unconstitutional is automatically null and void. But they didn't want to listen. They weren't listening to what I was saying. I was citing the 10th Amendment. 10th Amendment states clearly that whatever's not on federal level goes to the state or the people, but they didn't want to listen, right? They want to think that they're the authority. They represent the state. I am the people. My rights supersede the authority of the state. They weren't listening. So they still want to push for me to give my license, but I also saw other videos that possession is 9/10 of the law. Maybe that's illegal search and seizures as well. That's violating my Fourth Amendment right? Illegal search and seizures, that's my papers, right? So I'm seeing it as unconstitutional, that traffic law violation, because there's no harm to person or property. There's no victim. There's no victim. There's no crime. And I saw a lot of other indications on TikTok where people where there's no victim, no crime are getting cited. And because of my issue with the prior ticket for the same court and what have you, that's where I became more familiar with the state nationals. I might not agree with them denouncing their citizenship and what have you, and all their sovereign citizens and what have you, but nevertheless, it's like, okay, they're making sense. So I had all this knowledge coming into this traffic citation. It's like, all right, let's go for it. I'm already ticked off with all the COVID and what have you, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, forcing people to stay 6 feet apart and what have you, prohibiting people from gathering in churches and what have you. Meanwhile, you're allowing people to have all these protests and what have you without him wearing masks and what have you. So it's a high level of discrimination when we have our rights, right? Going back to Ruby Ridge, going back to Waco, going back to all the, I don't agree with Waco because of adulterer and what have you, 10 Commandments, he's a false prophet, but it's still within his rights, right? And they're also taking people to if you look at what was going on there, they're having arguments in court against each other, and that shouldn't be done because you don't take matters of the law to the unjust. Gentiles are unjust, right? So they're doing a lot of different dynamics that aren't biblically inclined. So it's like, all right, well, I'm going to assert my right? And what they didn't allow me to assert in this case is my identity, right? So when they're asking me for my license, maybe what I was actually trying to do the whole time, and again, I might not be the most proficient in doing it, but I was still asserting my right, is my name, my identity. Obadiah, servant of Yah, translates to in Hebrew, right? To assert to them that I am the church, right? That I am following common law, right? I cause no injury to person nor property. Therefore, it's not a crime. And in fact, it's blasphemy for them to violate my right to worship, because it is worship. That's part of the worship, is those 10 Commandments exclusively. So if I cause no injury to person nor property, that's blasphemy, and that's a crime. Literally, if you look up the definition from crime back in the 1850s and what have you, public worship, violating public worship is a crime, right? So they can try to define worship and what have you as being, well, you have to go to the church, but I am the church. That's why I was asserting. I am the church. No matter where I am the church. And my freedom of exercise is that it's a complete separation of church and state. So I understand there's got to be a little bit of concession here and there to a degree, but those concessions would be whether or not I actually caused harm to person or property. Then, in that sense, I would allow the state to interact with the church to ensure that the other citizen that I caused harm to gets what they need. But in cases when it comes to traffic accidents and what have you, you don't have to get the police involved unless you cause a physical injury to the other citizen. Then the police have to be involved. But if it's just damage to their property, the police don't need to be involved, right? So in that sense, there's no victim, no crime. I caused no property damage, and I didn't hurt anybody physically, so it's not a crime. They're violating the law by trying to instill their doctrine into my mentality, right? So that's what I was asserting, right? And that's what they're neglecting. So when they're trying to force me to do things and get my ID and what have you, that's when, and they're ignoring me and trying to make unlawful commands because I was asserting my rights, right? At that point in time, I called 911. I called 911 to indicate it's an insurrection against the people. 14th Amendment, equal protection, not equal application or general application, equal protection, right? Can't change the linguistics. So they weren't protecting my rights. They weren't abiding by their oath of office of the Constitution, right? Because again, I asserted that with them, that they have an oath of office to the Constitution. So, and Marbury versus Madison, all that's right there. It'll be in the videos and what have you. I have the videos and what have you. I haven't reviewed them myself, but it should be in the videos, including that 911 call. So the 911 dispatcher told me that, well, the lieutenant's showing up and what have you, and that she has other things that she'd rather be doing to help other people, and me being in a situation previously with the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, I understand how important it is to not hold people up on the phone. So when she said that the lieutenant was showing up, that's when I said, okay, I'll just engage the call, but it's still on record. If I wanted to FOIA that phone call, I will, right? I haven't yet. I'm still have to FOIA the police officer's oath of office, as well as the booking officers, as well as the DA's oath of office, right? Because she violated my rights in the court, right? So that said, they were coercing me to give up my rights. They're threatening to arrest me. They had my identification because when I called 911, because I knew where they're going, I knew that they weren't listening to me. So on that 911 call, I gave them my full name as it is on my license, as well as my driver's license number. And again, watching other videos, a lot of other police officers would ask for your full name and your date of birth. I did one better. I gave them my driver's license number. And I even pointed out to the person that was SWAT that was there, the backup, so to speak, on the 911 call, listen, watch. I even pointed out to him, gave him my full name, gave my driver's license number, made sure that he was paying attention. They still went after me. One, the lieutenant showed up, which he should have been listening to what I was asserting, because again, I was asserting my rights. He refused to listen. And then he started making threats too. So when he was making threats, I had full right to defend myself at that point, because I called 911 to report their criminal activity, because it is a crime for them to violate my rights. They are now committing a crime. They lose their immunity, right? So the lieutenant, which was on the other side there with the window rolled down, he was making threats too. He refused to listen. He didn't want to listen, right? And he was making threats too. It's like, all right, well, whatever, bud. So I went in the car. Obviously, most windows in a rental vehicle are going to be automatic. So I hit the button to roll up the window. It's rolling up. He reaches in, unlocks the door. They come in. They take me out of the vehicle. Now, I'm holding on to the wheel like this, to make sure that I'm not going to do anything to harm them. But at the same time, I also took note that the lieutenant's head is right here. So if I wanted to defend myself, which I had full right to do, I could have put some damage on him, right? Really could have. So if I was violent at all, I could have, and it would have been legal for me to do it, because they're criminal at that point in time, and he didn't want to listen to me asserting my rights. So they arrested me. They impounded the rental vehicle. That caused a lot of complications. I literally lost, I want to say, somewhere between $1,000 to $1,500 or so, based on this little interaction over a small stop sign, accidentally going through it, right? They arrested me illegally. I have the case law in regards to them not being able to do that. It was criminal, right? I wasn't brought before a magistrate. I wasn't told why I was being arrested. I was just told constantly to be cooperative, which I was actually trying to be from the get-go. I was asserting my rights. They weren't being cooperative, right? So when the booking officer, when everything went through, and I actually scolded them, and I wasn't even read my Miranda rights. So everything and when they got me to jail, I could have that omitted, right? But I don't care, because I didn't do anything wrong while I was there either. So when they had me sit down, I sat down because, again, I'm nice. I didn't try to run or anything like that. I told the police officer, that the SWAT person that was escorting me to the jail, you don't have to hold on to my arm or what have you, because I'm not going to run, right? So I got in the door, I did everything, I sat down, as they indicated. I stood up. I was going to ask him a question. I forget what the question was. I did get an opportunity to ask it, because when I stood up to ask them a simple question, I wanted to look at them while I was asking a question. They decided, three of them, start yelling at me. Said, oh, boom. That's the other aspect that they're neglecting. The other part of the free exercise. I was rebuking devils. When you're enforcing secular law on the church, you are a devil. If you're not obedient to those 10 commandments, you are a devil. I was rebuking devils. That's the other aspect. So it's not just a matter of the name. It's a matter of I have full authorization to exercise my right with impunity. I was rebuking devils. So I rebuked them. I screamed at them. Told them, public servants, because that's what they are. Public servants. My safety supersedes their perception of safety. They're there to protect my safety per their oath of office of the Constitution. They can't discriminate. That's in the New York State Code and that under civil rights and that as well. And the New York State Constitution as well. Multitude of times it states quite clearly that their purpose is to defend our rights, going all the way up to the Attorney General, to the Governor, right? All a matter of our rights, human rights, under the Executive Code, under 296. Obstruction, which I think it was a 195.05 is what they utilized against me, a Class A misdemeanor. But if you look at, I think under the actual initial term for obstruction, that's what they're doing. So as much as they're saying that I was obstructing them, they were actually obstructing me. And again, going back to the militia duty and what have you, as much as they want to proclaim, well, we're performing an investigation, it's like, yeah, same here, bud. Are you obstructing my investigation? I'm part of the executive branch too, bud. They can't be a part of militia being the police, but we are the executive branch. We are the militia. We are the unorganized militia. Unless you're military, then you can be a part of the organized militia. Then you have to get on a list, I think, or something like that after you hit 45 or something like that. But nevertheless, still applies, right? But the military can't be deployed posse comitatus on American soil, so the militia, the organized militia, can't be deployed in those circumstances, which is why it has to be relying on the citizen to assert their rights, right? So that said, when I scolded them, I was rebuking them, and they're, oh, if you're cooperative, it's like, look, I'm trying to be cooperative as much as possible. I even needed at one point a drink of water. They refused to give me a drink of water because my mouth was parched, and that they continued asking me certain questions. Like, look, bottom line is I'm going to have a difficulty answering these questions because you won't even let me have a drink of water, right? Cruel and unusual punishment, right? So they got me in jail cell and what have you, and then blah, blah, blah. And then the arresting officer came over, well, why didn't you just take the citation, argue it in court? It's like, I got to assert my rights. Look at what's going on around you, bud. He called me brother. It's like, I don't have any problem with people calling me brother, but biblically, my mother, my brother, and my sister are those who do the will of my Father. He is the devil, right? So it doesn't make a difference. I was asserting my rights. He didn't understand what the rights were because he didn't want to listen to me. But I was asserting my rights. So I told him directly, look at what's going on around you. If you don't assert your rights, you lose your rights, right? So that's what I was doing. I asserted my rights. And so eventually when I was let out of the jail cell with my vehicle impounded, with all my phones with it and what have you, I had no way to contact anybody. And with it being a rental vehicle, the only people that can get it out of impound is the rental company. The rental company, per their policies and what have you, won't go back to allow me to even have my phones out of the vehicle, get the phones out of the vehicle. I had to wait until the following morning with when the manager showed up to get the phones, and he was semi-reluctant to even give me the phones, and eventually I got all the problem. Well, it's a matter of the law. It's like, look, they violated my rights. You want to talk about the laws here? They violated my rights. So, and they took everything away. That's theft and everything else. So, well, so he gave me the phones and what have you, and I contacted the rental company about it and what have you, because the rental company was telling me the night previously, because I was actually stranded. I was 46 miles away from home. Nowhere to go, no phone to use, no way to figure out where I was and what have you. I'm not as familiar with the area. I don't know where the hotels or motels or anything else are and what have you. I had to walk to everywhere. I found some people that were thankfully allowed me to use the phone to contact the towing company to have this interaction at a convenience store, but that's where I got that information. So when I was just going to start walking aimlessly trying to figure out what I was going to do, right next door to the convenience store ended up being some people. They had their garage door open, they're watching TV. I asked them for a little bit of help and what have you. I didn't want to put them out, and they listened to my story and what have you, and they gave me some food, gave me a sweatshirt for the night, let me use their phone to try to contact my family. Couldn't get in contact with my family. I didn't have any phone numbers. This day and age, everything's on my phone. I don't know anybody's phone number by heart. I remember phone numbers from when I was growing up and what have you, but they no longer reply because everybody uses cell phones, right? So I don't know phone numbers or anything like that. I tried to get on my Facebook, tried to notify people based on Facebook, what have you, but nobody was able to come and get me. And nevertheless, which was a benefit actually, because again, I had to get everything at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's when they open. So I ended up having to roam the neighborhood, try to sleep. I couldn't sleep, crouched underneath trees and what have you, getting up, relieving myself in public, hoping I'm not going to get caught for being a public indecency or anything like that. I was hiding myself, so it's while I was urinating, but what else am I going to do? I have to go pee. Animals have to pee in Wavy too. I utilized another convenience store to get coffee and what have you to warm myself up, because it was during the colder part of the season still. It was in May. So that I wasn't too happy. I was up for over 24 hours, never got a wink of sleep. Contacted everybody. My brother picked me up. He's giving me a little bit of shit too. Why have you not fully listening to everything that was happening? He didn't understand the dynamic. He didn't understand that he thought I was in jail the whole time. I was like, no, I wasn't in jail. I was in jail for maybe an hour and a half, if that. And then I was walking the streets basically for the remainder, with the exception of when I was in the convenience store and what have you. But yeah, no. So I was livid. I emailed over to the court clerk when I gained possession of my phones. I was waiting for my brother to pick me up and what have you. The details of provide an affidavit of truth to a degree. I contacted the lawyers, the city attorneys, I should say, because I couldn't differentiate a district attorney from a city attorney at the time and what have you. So I did a little bit of digging, what have you. And again, I was up for over 24 hours at this point in time too, so I was doing the best I could with me being up there. But I was a little bit livid still, right? I texted the family. One of the family members is being a police officer and what have you, which I was indicating with the police officer. To the police, it's like, look, I have family that are police officers, but they didn't want to listen to that. So he wanted to, while I was being booked and what have you, well, what's her name? What's her name? So I gave him the name, and within a minute or two, and he did something on the computer, so I have no doubt that he actually did contact her in some way, shape, or form. But she said she says to never use her name or anything like that. So so it's like, yeah, I told him, well, she might be a little bit upset based on the history with the family, that it says that she came after me for, well, you don't respect the family, because they're on the modern Christian dynamic, Catholic and what have you. And it's like, look, truth is truth. It doesn't matter, especially if you're a police officer. You should understand that truth takes precedence over everything else. But I didn't need her help anyway, and it was the only reason why it was given the name is because he asked for it. He asked for me for it nicely. They weren't asking during the interaction at all. If they asked for something from me, they would have probably gotten it. But they're demanding. They're acting like they're the authority, and that's where they went wrong, because again, I'm rebuking devils. They don't have that authority. If they would have asked nicely, it would have been probably a little bit different. But nevertheless, I was asserting that right. What have you. They're a little bit having an attitude and everything with me asserting that right and what have you. So I was a little bit upset, but I did my digging. I didn't know I was cited for obstruction. I only had the traffic citations that they gave me. They didn't give me a citation for obstruction. Never told me that it was a matter of failure to identify, because again, 911 call, I identified myself. They didn't have a justification to arrest for failure to identify. So the only thing that they would indicate is obstruction. I had no idea what it was about. Well, how was I obstructing? I was actually trying to identify the whole entire time. So, nevertheless, go to court for the first time. It's literally like a month after the whole situation. So they're all right. Well, whatever. Show up to court and whatever, sign whatever they wanted me to do. What have you, and the DA said that they're ready for trial and what have you. I wanted to contact DA, I wanted to contact judge, because again, my dynamics, a matter of national security, right? They don't understand that, and whoever's watching this video probably wouldn't either. But to me, it's a matter of national security as well, right? And I might encompass that in a different video some on down the road, but it's a matter of national security, right? So I had printed out and what have you on with me, one that I could have handed the DA right there, all the justification, the legal precedents for what I did. Everything. Completely legal. Completely legit. So I don't know how court proceedings work, what have you, the arraignment and what have you. So she sent me over the discovery, asked me for the email address and what have you, gave her the email address. She sent me over the discovery through email and what have you. And when I got the email, I was walking back to my car out of a different rental vehicle, because again, they impounded a rental vehicle, and I wasn't able to rent from the one rental company, so I was renting from another. So I got back to the rental vehicle, and I actually kind of hit it, and I walked to the court because I didn't want them impounding another rental vehicle on me in case they were going to do something sketchy. I don't know how these things work in criminal court and what have you. So it's like, all right, well, whatever. Showed up to the arraignment. She emailed me over the discovery. When I got back to the rental vehicle, I sent out an email response, and that paperwork that I had in my hand, I also had it all because I have a subscription to Microsoft 365 for business and what have you. It was all actually in a Word document. So it's like, okay, there, I'll email you over the Word document. And I had everything highlighted and what have you to where that references my exact position. It's all in red what applies to this situation, right? So blah blah blah, and it was a long email with legal precedents, the attachment, the Word document, the legal precedents, the paperwork that I had in my hand. So the next court case was the following week, right? So showed up that court case, and before I was able to get edge in, she started rambling her spiel about the email and what have you. And I think that, well, maybe because I read and what have you, if you contact the DEA and assert your rights and what have you, tell them what your position is. I was proclaiming myself to be the prophet and what have you, and that'll be on the website and what have you too. The understanding of the prophet being, again, a part of the fivefold ministry under Ephesians 4:11, to some pastors, teachers, evangelists, apostles, and prophets, part of the fivefold ministry, proclaiming the divinity of Yahweh, his 10 commandments, right? That's the purpose of a prophet. So that said, and I was proclaiming where people are false prophets and what have you, is justification why I am in that position I'm in and what have you, again, with all the legal precedents and everything else, thinking, well, maybe she'll be rational. In turn, she tried to utilize it against me. Well, he thinks he's above the law and blah, 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 and he's a prophet, and he was saying a lot of these things about a prophet. Not her choice. That's a violation of my rights. So when she did what she did, and she was pushed for a 730 psych eval on me, right, under New York State Constitution, violation of the United States Constitution, right, because that's under state law, state statutes, right? So that said, as soon as she did that, I said discrimination. I also told the judge, I basically screamed out, let her get her spiel out, and made sure the judge was aware that I wanted to get my piece in, to wave my hand. And they said, well, you can, I corrected her because she was also going after me because I cited with the fact that I formally had security clearance of high security public trust to kind of assert the fact that, yeah, I know what the laws are, right? I had a criminal background check on me. I know what I'm doing here. I'm within my rights, right? And I even in that email said quite clearly, if you want to be dismissive of my rights, I will push this court case to federal court. It was all in that email, right? And I'll publish it and what have you. But she didn't want to listen to that. So when she did that, I cited discrimination, violation of the First Amendment, freedom of exercise. Likewise, a violation of the New York State Constitution under Article 1, Section 3, where it states quite clearly that I can't be discriminated against based on my values, my beliefs, my religion, in other words. Article 1, Section 1, my rights can't be taken away from me, right? So all these different, and also I was saying equal protection and everything else, validating that, cited the fact that all these different things, and I went in about because the thing, well, he doesn't recognize the authority of the court and what have you. It's like, okay, well, during the 7-year extensive background check for my security clearance, I asserted that with the Justice Department at that point in time too, that I believe during the interaction that the royal priesthood, the saints, in other words, should be in charge of everything. But when I was asked as to whether or not I would go up against the government, depose the government or what have you, it's like, no, as long as I'm free, then the government has nothing to worry about for me, right? And I asked her, am I free? She said, yes. So, I mean, she had her head down in that regard because she was trying to argue in a little case in regards to the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1968 with me. But I asserted that and that was back when they were doing the investigation for the 7-year background check, validated that she doesn't understand the law either, right? So, that said, getting back to the court, it's like, all right, well, 730 psych eval and what have you. It's like, I even called it out. She said a 730. She didn't say a psych eval. I knew it was a psych eval, right? Boom. Kind of shut her up on that. It's like, oh yeah, I know a little bit more than what you think, because she was also saying, I don't think he even knows where he is and what have you, trying to kind of send me, saying I was mentally retarded or something like that. It's like, all right, boom. So I got to my piece, said it to the judge, validated my position to a degree, validated that it's a matter of I don't have respect for the judicial system in its entirety and what have you. Not anything to be an asshole about, but like I said, it's a matter of the royal priesthood. We're the judges, right? So I understand the circumstance too. He doesn't have any of the information or what have you at his disposal, but she also was trying to remand me to custody. So steal everything. And at that point, because of the first interaction, I actually didn't hide the rental vehicle. So that would have screwed me over. They would have impounded the vehicle, another rental vehicle on me, and screwed me out of everything for another. It would have been, oh my goodness. So kind of thing. But the judge, in a sense, made his own threat because they're trying to, that's the other aspect, no fear. Faith is fearlessness. It's not just mere belief. So no matter how much they're coming after me, it's a matter of I can't be fearful. And I wasn't fearful. So even though that they're coming after me, it's like, oh God, here we go, kind of thing. And he said, well, I'm obligated to remand you, but I'm not going to, right? So that's when I was leaving, I decided that I also told her that if she wants to be dismissive of my rights, I could move it to the federal court, to the district court. And the judge was saying, that is my right, and I said that I would learn the protocols, which I'm doing, right? So that all said, now ever since I've been obviously documenting everything a little bit more further. The paperwork that's online, what have you, that's currently on my website isn't fully entailed. But again, it's a matter of asserting your rights, right? It's Title 18, Section 242. I did 2 complaints with the Federal Division of Civil Rights. The first one I made on 10 days after the indication when I was emailing the city attorneys, and they never responded, and I offered them a plea offer, believe it or not, and I never got a response, so I filed a complaint there against the police officers without knowing their names and what have you. And I got an email back from that division saying hate crimes, religious activity, and what have you, validating my position and telling me to contact the FBI, which was part of that paperwork that was submitted over the DA. But again, she had missed that part, and I even cited the complaint number and everything else. So after she did everything that she did, me doing some digging, what have you, I trying to figure out certain things. When I got the psych eval papers in the mail, I let them know that I filed a complaint against her too, because she violated her oath of office to the Constitution, because she used to defend the Constitution too. Same with the judge. Everybody, all the public servants in there, when she was violating my rights, my civil rights, in a court of law, they should have been standing up and arresting her for that. And when she wanted me to be remanded into custody based on that 730, that's an attempt to kidnap me. That's 25 years in prison, right? So understand your rights, know what your rights are, know the laws, because federal law supersedes state law, as you can clearly indicate throughout this entire video with my employment issues and what have you. Constant case where you have people that are on the state level wanting to be dominant over the federal laws, but our rights are on the federal level, and they can't take those away from us, no matter what they do. They can't be stripped away. You have to have due process for them to be stripped away. And in my particular case, if again, going back to the Title 18, Section 242, it applies to police officers, prison guards, judges, healthcare personnel, everybody like that. They can't violate your rights, but they do. And they get away with it because people don't stand up for their rights. So stand up for your rights. I'll provide all the documentation as I get it on the website. I have everything highlighted. I have documents that for the everything. It'll be all there. It applies likewise to the Second Amendment. Any right that you have, gun laws are automatically null and void because, again, they're unconstitutional. You have to stand up for your rights. If you don't assert your rights, you lose rights. And this applies globally because, again, going per my first video, all nations have been deceived, and it's the job of the saints to teach people the right way, to teach them. You don't come after them. We are the light in the darkness, right? So you do good to those that harm and persecute you. So as much as I can sue them, litigate heavily against them, that's why I don't want a lawyer, and that's what she's pushing for, is for me to get a lawyer because she doesn't think I'm capable to defend myself, which is the 730 psych eval. But I validated that I can. I did historically as well in other trials. I defend myself twice. But because she wants to get a plea offer out of me and what have you and be able to just push it away and mitigate my rights, that's why the 730 psych eval. I'm going to have fun with that in court. Shalom.